and welcome to Homegrown History with Limestone County archivist Rebekah Davis and longtime Athens, Alabama native Richard Martin. Each episode, Richard and Rebekah backtrack in time to explore some of the more famous and infamous events etched in Limestone County's rich history.
Hi, welcome to Homegrown History. This is the Limestone County History Podcast. I'm Rebekah Davis, and I'm here with my co-host.
I'm Richard Martin, the oldest one here.
That's right, and that's why he's here, because not only does he know the history, he lived it. And just to tell you a little bit about who we are, I am the archivist at the Limestone County Archives. I've been there for 10 years learning about Limestone County history. But before that, my family, I can't claim to be a native of Limestone County because my family moved here when I was 3. But we moved here in 1981, and Richard is...
I'm old.
He's 81.
My family on my mother's side came here in 1810, so we know a lot of history.
That's right. And tell a little bit more about who you are and what you remember from kind of growing up in Athens, Richard.
Growing up in Athens in the 40s and the 50s, we had a lot of fun, and all those boys had a BB gun and a bicycle, and we'd ride all over town on that and find what we could find.
And I grew up here in the 1980s, and back then, people still let their kids ride their bikes all over town, too. I'd actually ride up to the library whenever I was a library page up here as a teenager. And so this is full circle for me.
But anyway, we'll bring you some good homegrown stories about the history of Athens and Limestone County.
Exactly. And so we're going to talk about, over the course of however many episodes we do, we're just going to carry you through some of our favorite stories of Limestone County history and some of the high points, the things that happened and the people that shaped Limestone County into what we know today, starting all the way back with some of the natives and carrying all the way through to what you see around you today.
Well, some of the early settlements came here in 1807, came down the Tennessee River, and we're going to tell you all about that and where they came into and stayed. And then we're going to tell you a little about Fort Hampton and why there was a Fort Hampton. And then we're going to tell you about Elk County, that's Limestone County. We're going to tell you a little bit about that, and then the territory.
Yeah, and some of the interesting things I think, too, about some of those first people and Fort Hampton is usually when you think about the fort, those forts were established, you think about the Wild West, to protect the settlers from the natives, but here it was the other way around, wasn't it? The Sims settlement, those Sims folks who came down the river, they were coming into Chickasaw territory. They were basically illegal immigrants in Chickasaw Nation, weren't they?
That's right.
Yeah, you come from a bunch of illegals. Explains a lot, Richard.
But we'll take you down to Easter Ferry Road, tell you where to go look for sites to visit and all that. That's
true. One of the things that the Limestone County Historical Society and the archives and many other groups have done is try to highlight some of these areas around the county. So as we go through this, you're going to see places that maybe you've seen that bronze marker on the side of the road and you go, well, I wonder what that's all about. Well, read it, first of all, right? But then we're also going to take some time during this podcast to tell you more about some of those places. Some of the early towns. For example, most folks around here know that Mooresville is older than the state, is one of the first incorporated towns in the state. But Athens is only 3 days younger, isn't it?
3 days younger.
We're a couple of Athens folks. We have a little Athens pride.
That's right. We're coming on.
In November of 1818, after Limestone County was established in February of 1818, and we'll talk about some of the history of some of our most notable buildings around here, like the first courthouse, which was built when they cleared off the square they cleared the trees off the square and used the logs to build the courthouse.
Yeah, everything was built by logs. Everything was, that's the way to do it. There's so much good timber around here.
Right. And, of course, no Limestone County History podcast would be complete with talking about the trains and the Civil War. Athens was one of those places where the Union troops occupied, and so there was damage here. I mean, even the courthouse was burned. We're really blessed to still have a lot of the records that we do. But tell a little bit about Fort Henderson, what happened there. I know you've had a lot to do with the Sulphur Creek Trestle Fort, too.
Yeah. The Battle of Athens was in September of 1864. One day, and that's where the African-American soldiers were.
Oh, speaking of trains.
Yes, here come a train.
Where we record Warren is right by the railroad tracks, so you're going to hear a train every now and then. It'll just add to the ambiance, won't it?
Right, that's right. So anyway, the Battle of Athens, and then after that battle, they went up towards Elkmont, about 8 miles up the road, and there was a trestle up there called Suffolk Creek Trestle, and that was a major battle in the state of Alabama, one of the most major ones, and then had a battle there, and there were African-American soldiers there also. They were fighting for their freedom, and we have a lot of beautiful stories about them.
That's right. That's one of the things I think is most fascinating about some of the Civil War battles here is that many of the people who fought there at Fort Henderson, at Suffolk Creek Trestle, were former enslaved people who left the plantations around here, signed up for the Union, and they were fighting. They built those forts. They built them to fight for their freedom. And then, of course, after the war, where did they go?
After the war, they started Trinity School, a lady that was a nurse for the Wisconsin boys. And she stayed down here and started the Trinity School for the African-American kids. So that's how they got started. And, of course, you'll be surprised who came out of that, and you need to stay tuned to hear all that, too. That's a beautiful story.
Absolutely. And of course, education has always been important here. I know Athens State University is the oldest institution of higher education in Alabama, oldest continually operating. And I know one of the things that we're really excited about doing with this podcast, Richard, is bringing in folks who know more than we do, aren't we?
I hope so. That's right.
For example, Harry Joyner, our friend,
right,
who is retired from Athens State, has graciously agreed to join us in some of the first episodes to talk about early Alabama, to talk about the history of Athens State, which will be celebrating its bicentennial in just, next year, isn't it?
That's right.
Right up. Yeah.
That's right.
And then, of course, some of our friends who attended Trinity, like David Malone and Charlotte Fulton, who wrote the history of Trinity, we're excited about having them here to talk about what they know. Just kind of taking a detour off of the overview of history. Richard, I know one thing I'm sure you will find to be true as well. We both grew up here. You went to school in the city schools here, and I worked at the newspaper here. I thought I knew Limestone County like the back of my hand until I came to the archives. And now I find that I'm learning something every day. And really, we could still be doing this podcast in 20 years if the good Lord's will and the creek don't rise, couldn't we? And still be learning new things.
Right.
And we will here in a moment both share a couple of our favorite little tidbits in Limestone County history. I know some of the towns that we have here, like Ardmore, came in because of the train for the most part.
Right.
Belmina is an interesting place as well. We'll tell more a little bit about that later. I will say one little tidbit about Limestone County history that I think is fascinating about Belmina. You know how Belmina got its name, don't you? Belmina, down there in South Limestone, was the second governor of Alabama, Thomas Bibbs' home. And he decided to build a beautiful mansion, and he wanted to be fancy, so he called it Belle Manor, French for beautiful mansion. But what he didn't count on was all these southern folks around here who talk about, let's go up to the Belmina and see Mama and them. And over the years, the name changed from Belle Manor to Belmina, and that's what it is to this day.
I forgot about that. That's right.
We'll have to do a whole episode just on funny Limestone County names, won't we?
Our southern accent.
Yeah, well, we both got that one down pat, don't we?
Yeah.
So just kind of carrying through, Limestone County is doing now what it did 100 years ago, which is after the turn of the century, it really boomed. There were a lot of people who came in and industry and so on. And then sort of rose and fell with the Great Depression. But I know TVA, World War II and TVA were two of the big things that kind of pulled the county all together.
TVA brought us out of poverty.
Absolutely. I know my granddaddy was one of the Civilian Conservation Corps boys who worked with the New Deal, and my daddy worked at the Browns Ferry nuclear plant, which was also the largest one in the nation at the time it was built.
Yeah, before TVA, we had so much pneumonia and typhoid fever, malaria.
Yes.
So they'd get quinine by the 55-gallon drums, and the druggist would, and sell that out of that because there was so much. Then when TVA came, they leveled off the creeks and everything, the land and flood, and it turned out great. So they cut out that malaria.
Right. You're right, and that brings up another podcast episode we intend to do is talk about epidemics in Limestone County. We're beginning this, recording this as we've been a year into the coronavirus pandemic, and that's uppermost in everybody's mind, something we're living through history right here. But these things have come through Limestone County over the years, and we'll be talking some about that over the course of
when I was a kid, polio was the big thing, and you'd go to a movie because it didn't have television, and we'd go to the movie, and they would stop the movie and pass out the bucket to take up money. So we helped fight polio back in the 50s.
March of Dimes.
Big
thing. Right, mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, and another thing that's very much reoccurrent in Limestone County history is tornadoes.
Oh, boy.
There's been, they used to call them cyclones back in the day. Right. Of course, and I lived through the 2011 tornadoes, but you lived through the 74 tornadoes.
Yeah, I remember. I was at a restaurant, and it was hailing bigger than my fist, bigger than my hand. And I knew we need to get out of there and go somewhere, and we went home.
Find a hole to hide in.
Found a hole, and then tore up that part of the county.
That's right. Well, the previous assistant archivist, Sandra Birdwell, at the Limestone County Archives, her house got hit by the tornadoes in 74, actually pulled her son right up out of her arms and dropped him in a field nearby. She thought for sure he was a goner, but he came out with just a few scratches. It's miraculous, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it was, rather.
So we've got, Kelly Kazak has written an excellent book about Limestone County tornadoes, and she's agreed to join us when we get to that point in our history. And when we think about some of even the more recent developments of Limestone County history, the growth of the interstates and industries, and of course, the Toyota Mazda plant coming in. We're living history right now. It's changing Limestone County even as we speak, isn't it?
That's right. There's just so many jobs are coming available, and then other industries following that too. But that interstate, good grief.
I know.
That's about 1.5 million people come down it each year. And I ain't no telling how many's going to come down in the next few years.
Tell me what it was like to grow up in Limestone County before the interstate system.
There wasn't no interstate. It went right down through East Pryor Street and then Clinton Street, and I lived on East Pryor, and we'd see all them Army troops coming in and all that, the buses going by, and we're just fascinated with all the cars. And we'd sit out on my porch and count cars sometimes. Mm-hmm. There were a lot. Yeah. A lot of people passed through.
Well, and you were born right before World War II, before your daddy went off.
Yeah.
Tell a little bit about that.
I was born in 1939, and my father got drafted. He has 4 children, and he was 36 years old and got drafted. So he joined the Navy to keep from going to the Army. And then we missed him for 2 years. He was gone for 2 years. So my mother had to raise us by herself and her father by herself. And we had help, of course, through our grandparents, had gardens and stuff like that. And, of course, we walked everywhere. You didn't have a car, so you had to walk everywhere. So it was a hard time, but we all wanted to do our part. We put on plays during the war and save up some money and go to the movie. Then we'd go out and collect up scrap iron and turn it in so they could make bullets out of that scrap iron.
Yeah, you were part of that effort, weren't you?
That's right.
Tell about that family picture you got hanging on your wall that was taken during that time.
Oh, we got a family picture. The photograph man says, all right, let's everybody smile. We're going to send this picture to your daddy. Well, we were all just sad and all. We were all little, so we wasn't happy because our daddy was gone. Mm-hmm. So we have that picture today telling our expressions of what we looked like and how sad we were because our daddy had left to go fight the World War II.
It's a beautiful picture of your beautiful mama and your brothers and your sister and you, but y'all do look so sad and so pitiful.
Right. But anyway, we survived it.
That brings us to your favorite tidbit of Limestone County history. You want to go ahead and tell about what you've got about the day that World War II ended and what that was like in Limestone County?
When World War II ended, when the Germans surrendered, the fire truck went all over, had flags, and went all over Athens. And Steve Allen was my next door neighbor, my best friend. His granddaddy, R.C. Allen, was the fire chief, and he was on that. We were so proud, so I got on my bike and ran home to tell my mother, and she and my grandfather were dancing in the living room because the war was over in Germany. And my cousin Dick Martin was flying a Piper Cub, and so he and another fella act like they were dog fighting, and they got in trouble about that, showing off. But anyway, when they got home, their mamas got them. It was an exciting time when the war ended with the Germans, and then we knew Daddy had to fight the Japanese War, finish that one off.
That's right. Well, and a couple of my favorite tidbits of Limestone County history have a little bit to do with World War II as well. And these are things that I never knew until I came to the Limestone County Archive. So I never really knew that I had family from here until, my family's from all over. I was born in Decatur, and they're from all over the country. But I did learn that my great-great-grandma lived right over here in the Beatty Historic District. And my great-great-aunt, her name was Jareen Turner. And one day when the Friends of the Archives was working on a book about the first year of World War I was looking over it, and the name caught my eye, Jareen Turner. And it turned out it was an article with pictures of these local Athens women who were taking metal riveting classes at Athens High School, just on the other side of the tracks over here from the library where the old middle school is now. And because all the men, of course, were off to war, and they were Athens' own real life Rosie the Riveters. With the big muscle, we can do it. But the pictures, these ladies, they're doing man's work, and they're doing it in heels and dresses. It always reminded me of that old quote, Ginger Rogers did everything that Fred Astaire did. She just did it backwards and in heels. Well, that's what my Aunt Jareen did. And she was the first one from Athens to get a job in the riveting industry. She went out to Memphis and worked on plane rivets and so on. Of course, when the war was over, the men came back and they wanted their jobs back. So Jareen, she moved up to Detroit, and she worked in Detroit in the metalworking industry until she retired. And she was still living whenever I was a little thing. And I remember my parents talking about how she was crazy and mean and all this stuff. And I only ever knew her as Crazy Aunt Jareen, But I tell you what, she probably had to be mean to do man's work in a man's world and to be tough. And so I have a lot of respect for her. So that's my favorite tidbit. It's fine. One of my favorites is just to learning that my own great aunt was the first Rosie the Riveter from Limestone County.
That's about what we have. And of course, we want to talk about Trinity, and we're going to have a special guest about segregating and integrating what happened and how it happened. And of
course, Richard, you grew up during the days of segregation.
Right.
And you know what that was like here in the South and here in Athens.
Well, I did. They had colored water fountains and white water fountains, and the colored folks went upstairs in the movie and we went down, and I never paid much attention to it and didn't realize how bad it was until later on in life I realized how wrong it all was. So we got to make it better, and we got to make it better today. So we're going to tell you about that.
Well, and it's interesting. That does bring me to another little tidbit of Limestone County history that I think is fascinating. So I grew up, just a mile as a crow flies north of Trinity. I never knew it was there, just right off Hines Street. And, growing up, driving down Hines Street, I'd see Plato Jones Street, Box Alley. You hear about Box Alley and all the reasons why it was called that. And we'll do a whole episode on Plato Jones and Box Alley, because Plato Jones was a fascinating person too. But a few years ago, I found out why they called it Box Alley. And it doesn't have anything to do with the shape of the streets or who gets boxed in or what's there. It has to do with bombs. So after the World War II was over, a lot of the leftover bombs were shipped to what was then called the Huntsville Arsenal to be destroyed. And they were shipped in these real nice wooden crates with hinges and handles and so on. And wood, as you know, Richard, wood was scarce when the war was over, wasn't it?
Yeah.
All those things had been used for the effort. Right. And so local folks there in Huntsville and all over the North Alabama area would go scavenging those boxes they were tossing out, and they would take the wood and hinges and handles and all that, and they would use that to build houses.
Right.
And after about a few weeks, the arsenal realized they could make some money off of it. So I think they started selling them for $0.25 a piece for those boxes. And so people would take them. So over there on Box Alley, and there's several over in Low Mill too, were houses that were at least partially built from bomb boxes. And that's how it became known as Box Alley. And so I'd love to be able to find some of those old, markings on some of the lumber in the houses over there, but some of that's all long gone now. But I think that's fascinating to show. This is one of the things I think is my feeling in studying Limestone County history. Folks here are scrappy, aren't they?
Yeah.
They find ways to make do, to overcome circumstances, to just keep on going and rise regardless.
Right. When you're poor, you got to do what you got to do.
That's right. So I guess that kind of gives you a good sense of what we're going to be doing. We hope that you will join us and follow along, subscribe on your favorite podcast listener, because we're going to bring you as much history as you can stand.
That's right.
Homegrown history. Look for it. And we're homegrown, and the stories we're telling you are homegrown too. So y'all come join us again.
Bye-bye.
All right.
You've been listening to Homegrown History, a podcast produced by the Athens-Limestone County Public Library in cooperation with the Limestone County Archives in Athens, Alabama. Join us next time as we explore the yesterdays that have made Limestone County what it is today. For more information, please visit the archive website at limestonecounty-al.gov. To hear other recordings from our Library of Voices podcast series, please visit the Athens-Limestone County Public Library's website at alcpl.org. Library Voices is also now available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.